Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Alrighty, guys, as always, I'm your host, Marcus Vargas, and welcome back for another episode of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Hope you all are doing well. Hope you all are safe, happy, and healthy. Today's show, we start off with some tips to help you during your fantasy football drafts. I've talked about them here and there, sprinkled them in the midst of other conversations, but I've never done a section, just about the tips that I would give someone who's either new to fantasy football or who's just looking for some advice. Maybe they struggle. So basically what I'm going to do is just give you guys some tips that I think will help you have a more successful draft. I'm not saying, these tips are going to guarantee a Super Bowl championship, right? Because nothing is guaranteed in fantasy football. Actually, hey, tip number one, come to terms with the fact that nothing is guaranteed in fantasy football. You are going to draft someone who you think is, high in value or great at that pick. That person is going to severely disappoint you. It is very rare that I go through an entire draft and I keep every single person that I drafted on my team for more than even 6 weeks. Not even going to lie. Sometimes, depending on injury, I'll exclude, because of course when someone gets injured, you're going to want to replace them should they, say, they're going to miss the whole season. But, just coming to terms with that idea is really going to help you, because you're not going to be stressing too much about every single pick, right? I mean, we just have to understand that not every pick's going to hit, and, not having that pressure on yourself to, be obsessing over what is the perfect pick here is going to help you, in your decision making, at least help you in your, your mental, because honestly, there's a lot of mental factors in the fantasy football game. I don't know, more than some people may realize, especially when drafting. A lot of it comes down, one, to your decision making, and two, actually most of it's about your decision making because, two, your ability to deal with that pressure. Because another thing, I see a lot of guys or girls, they get into a fantasy football draft and they'll let the clock run too much. Tip number 2, don't let the clock run down to the last second every time you're picking. I would suggest having a few options before your pick comes up at that pick, so that if someone you want gets taken, you're ready for the next pick. I've seen people, waiting for their pick. We finally get to their pick. Their guy gets taken. They don't know who to choose, and they end up having the clock run out on them and get auto-picked because they really couldn't decide. Now, I know you get, a good amount of time, but sometimes the decision-making is just that hard, because, especially in the earlier rounds. Later on, you're just kind of, you're either taking chances on guys you think are going to be guys you think are going to be great sleepers, or you're just picking willy-nilly because you don't really care anymore. But in the earlier rounds, picking between elite talent and picking whether you want a wide receiver, do you want a running back here, do you finally want to pick up your tight end, that kind of stuff can definitely weigh on the mental and cause you to make some questionable decisions. So I would suggest that you have a plan. For your draft. Don't go into drafting. I know it sounds kind of silly, sounds kind of cheesy, but especially if you're in a fantasy football league playing for money, you should be trying pretty hard, right? Nobody just wants to lose money for no reason. Of course, I'm not saying, be psychotic and obsessive over it, but going into the draft with a strategy to say, okay, if I'm this pick, or, if you guys do, in my leagues that I do, I guess this would only apply to leagues where your draft position a bit in advance before the draft. We do, maybe a couple of days before the draft, we'll pick names from a hat random, and that's the order of the draft. So, if you do something like that, or if your draft position, a couple of days in advance, maybe even a week, whatever in advance, then plan for the draft and how you're going to tackle it, right? If you get pick 10 or pick 12 and 9 running backs go before your pick comes up, do you want to take the 10th best running back, or do you want to take the first overall wide receiver? Those are things you have to consider. Those are things you're going to have to plan out. So have a strategy. Don't let the clock run down too often every time you have to pick. Now, another tip I would give you is to not stack your team so much with the same position. And what I mean by this is, if you go your first 3 rounds, running back, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage. Especially like I mentioned before, if people are picking a ton of running backs before you, stacking yourself at a position that is already weaker than another that could get you much more fancy points, it's just going to put you at a disadvantage. I know running backs have a ton of potential to score, a ton of points because, they rush and they can catch passes. If you're in a PPR league, of course that helps. Even in standard, the receiving yards help. But, like I said, if I was in a position where 9 running backs are taken before me, literally in a row, and Michael Thomas has somehow slipped to pick 9 or 10, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? And I mean, of course, that's not going to happen. But what I'm saying is, you don't want to just fill your team with running backs or fill your team with wide receivers. You got to try and find that balance. Maybe 1 or 2 running backs, then your wide receiver, or 2 wide receivers, then your running back. You alternate that way, but you kind of have to read what's going on in your draft room. Of course, this is going to be different for everyone, so pay attention. That's the crazy thing about fantasy football. There is no one cookie cutter way to tackle all of this. So, you on your own are going to have to be reading your draft room. Knowing the people you play with is also a big factor. If you can, I guess this would be another tip. Try to know and study the people you're drafting with. This is something that I've done for sure. Something that I've used to kind of plan my draft around. I've studied other people to draft around them because, I play, let's say, just for example, I played in a league with someone who I know is a Jets fan, right? Or someone who I know is an Eagles fan. Those people are more inclined to take players on their teams when their players start, when it's sort of their ADP is coming up on the board, right? So say we get through the first round and Miles Sanders is on the board. Let's say Kenyon Drake is still there or something, right? Nick Chubb maybe slipped. That player, a lot of times I've experienced, they are more likely to take the player that's on their team over someone else who has the same or more potential. Now, this is an outlier. But I was actually in a draft. Most of the people knew what they were doing. One guy who I assume was a Buccaneers fan, and I'm even blanking on the Buccaneers running back's name because that's how irrelevant they were last season. But why am I blanking on his name? Is it Kelly? Oh my goodness. The Buccaneers starting running back. Let me see if I can get this name here. Sorry, guys. I am just blanking on this name, so I want to make sure I get this right. Ronald Jones. Thank you. Whew. He drafted Ronald Jones in the 2nd round. Clearly a bad pick. Clearly, maybe this guy didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he was a diehard Bucs fan. I actually didn't know the person personally. There were a couple people in the draft that I didn't know personally, but take advantage of those kinds of people. You just have to. If you're drafting, your draft pick is behind or ahead of someone who's doing that, you can sort of plan ahead. Let's say you have pick 9 and that person has pick 10. You don't have to worry about taking a certain person because this person doesn't really know how to play fantasy football. Your other pick is going to be available when he takes or she takes their 2 picks in a row. Just saying. It's definitely a valuable thing to do. One other thing that I would like to tell you guys is to wait on defenses and kickers. The reason why It is so hard to predict in a given year how kickers and defenses are going to perform. It's hard to predict how anyone's going to perform, but kickers and defenses are basically impossible. Even when, myself or you see, fantasy quote unquote experts doing rankings for these things, they are so just blind and just based on the, the recency sort of bias, living the why am I blanking on this term? Basically, just like I said, the recency bias, what the team has done lately. That's what the rankings are based off of, because interesting little fact nugget. The 49ers were only drafted, I think it was like less than 5% of ESPN leagues, yet they became the top fantasy football defense, right? And the Chicago Bears were by far the top drafted fantasy defense, and they finished as fantasy's number 16 defense. So if that doesn't prove it for you there, I don't know what will. But basically you can sort of shoot in the dark with a defense, and get it right. But I will say, I wouldn't say, don't draft one or just wait and just grab whatever team, because there are defenses that are bad, right? You don't want to end up not drafting one, picking up the Dolphins defense, them getting shredded and getting negative points, right? Like last season, if you did that, I feel sorry for you. But you can, sort of take your time, take more chances on sleepers, guys who are available who might be of, great value, at the later picks, and then wait on your defense and kickers. Another interesting fact nugget from ESPN, Greg Zuerlein, his ADP was higher than guys like Dak Prescott and Kyler Murray. So some people drafted Greg Zuerlein before they drafted two of the top 10 fantasy football quarterbacks. So, that's surefire signal. Do not draft kickers until it is probably the last or the second to last round. If people are grabbing kickers before then, let them have them. Whatever, it's fine. I mean, I would say, there are like a top three, I'm thinking Harrison Butker, I'm thinking Will Lutz. Those guys, they're going to score points. They're pretty consistent. But after that, it becomes sort of a crapshoot. You're just kind of taking a chance on anyone, and, they can come up big at any given moment, So wait on defense, wait on defense and special teams, wait on kickers. You'll be thanking me later, because you'll be able to take a chance on another player like a Kyler Murray that was picked after Greg Zuerlein, like a Dak Prescott. So I imagine you're that guy who could have had Dak Prescott, the number 2 fantasy football quarterback, but instead you have Greg Zuerlein, right? Greg Zuerlein didn't have the greatest season last season either, so keep that in mind. And while we're on that page, don't draft more than one of these positions. You don't need 2 defenses. You don't need 2 kickers. This is a position where if I ever have 2 defenses or 2 kickers on my team, it's because I have a very solid kicker. I don't want to drop him to the waiver wire when he has a bye week. So I pick up another kicker. I drop one of my weaker players into the waiver wire. I start that kicker. I release that kicker after, and then I continue with the kicker that I had. There's absolutely no reason to have a second defense or a second kicker unless you're just a toxic guy and you're just hoarding kickers and defenses away from other people. One thing I will say, though, I guess if you were to have 2 defenses, this is the only thing I could imagine. I would imagine you alternating 2 different defenses, whichever has the better matchup that week. That is a strategy that I could see potentially working. I honestly, that it sounds kind of crazy, but if you have, let's say just for last season, the Ravens that played if you have 2 defenses that play the Dolphins in weeks back to back, especially if it's late in the season and you're planning ahead, that actually might be very, very smart for you, right? We get into the fantasy football playoffs, and you get 2 teams that have very, very favorable matchups late in the year, and your defense ends up scoring 12 plus points both weeks. That's going to help you win the playoffs and hopefully win a championship. So there are ways to mix and match your strategy to not sort of follow a guideline or do what everyone else does. But typically people are doing the same things because those are the things that work. Those are the things that make sense. So yeah, don't draft them too early. Don't stack your team with defenses and kickers. And for the last tip, real quick, before we get into the break, wait on tight ends, unless his name is Travis Kelce or George Kittle. Pretty much, and maybe Zach Ertz. I'll throw Zach Ertz in there as well, because he has potential to be very elite. Pretty much, guys, yes, the tight end seems to have more depth this season, but it really doesn't make sense to spend on tight end early unless you're getting one of the top dogs. If you're getting Travis Kelce early, that's great. He was, the top tight end by a mile last season. And if you're getting George Kittle, that's fine too, because he's an elite kind of guy. But if you're not getting an elite tight end, you will be fine waiting on one and getting one that's sort of with the rest of the pack, because it's really a top three and the rest is whatever kind of position. Another tight end, you can take chances on sleeper tight ends with more potential later on that might, give you a bunch of success. Austin Hooper was a guy who wasn't drafted that early last season, and, we saw what he was doing last season. So these are some tips. Of course, I'll update these tips and give you guys more as time goes on, but those are it for now. We're going to go into our first break of the day, and when we get back, more fantasy football. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. To start this segment off, just want to let you know we're going to be doing some article review. It does have to do with fantasy football, of course, as I mentioned. But I wanted to go over a very, very interesting article I read. It's actually on ESPN Plus. That's also why I really wanted to cover it, because I know not everyone has access to ESPN Plus for whatever reason that may be. And it's some very, very valuable information, and I wanted to give my opinion on it as well. Now, basically, the article, for anyone who does have ESPN Plus, I encourage you to go read it. It's by Mike Clay. It's wide receivers with the easiest and toughest schedules in fantasy football. Mike Clay does a great job here. He goes in depth, with the best and worst cornerback units. Ranks all these teams. He has the Chargers at number 1, New England at number 2, Baltimore number 3, so on and so forth. Not gonna lie, was sad to see my Chiefs at number 26th in the league, but that's neither here nor there. He also then categorizes which corners often shadow the best wide receiver on the other team and who sometimes shadows. It's very, very interesting to think about. And I want to talk about some wide receivers who are upgraded or downgraded as a result of this research and findings. I want to start with who he has as upgrades, because these are guys that I may have been telling you about to be high on or not, but I want to talk about them. The first one he has, he actually has a whole wide receiving unit. The Lions, Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, and Danny Amendola. Guys, I have been all over the Lions, Matt Stafford and Kenny Golladay, and I'm more on them now. Detroit is set to face the easiest slate in all three of the categories overall, against number 1 receivers and against the slot. Of course, Kenny Golladay is going to get shadowed probably by, the other corners the opposing corners, because he is the wide receiver 1. But, if he has a bunch of easy games, you're going to be fine. The Lions will face 12 cornerbacks that are ranked in the bottom half of the league, and only one that he has ranked better than 9th. So, there you go, guys. The Lions, Kenny Golladay, big upgrade for you. I think he's going to have a monster season, because I also think Matthew Stafford's going to have a monster season, and clearly those two go hand in hand. Next, he has the Packers' Devontae Adams. Now, This is very interesting too because recently when doing mock drafts, I've seen Davante Adams slipping, but I don't think he should be slipping. And I think a lot of people are going to let him slip because of what happened last season and the injury concerns. But he is an elite fantasy football wide receiver when healthy, and I think he's going to continue to be elite. Also, remember, Aaron Rodgers is his quarterback, and he's going to be facing the second easiest schedule. I mean, come on. Also, Davante Adams' schedule is seventh easiest during the fantasy football playoffs. I mean, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Perhaps the biggest one here is this next one. Michael Thomas, guys. Michael Thomas is on here. He also includes Emmanuel Sanders, but I'm not going to care much for Emmanuel Sanders because I really don't believe he's going to be putting up that many fantasy football points. I could be wrong. I have been before. I understand. You can't get everything right. But, to have, arguably the best, some people argue he's the best wide receiver in football right now. Clearly was the best fantasy football wide receiver last season by a large margin. To have him with a very easy schedule for next season is scary and only gives you more motivation to draft him earlier, as people have been doing top 3, top 4 picks. I think this is going to make him shoot up people's draft boards, people who can, have access to ESPN Plus or who have studied the schedules that the Saints have and can tell, they have a pretty easy schedule. I understand Emmanuel Sanders, yes, he gets the boost. He gets a boost and he benefits, from the easier schedule. But I really think, he's not going to be much more than a flex next season. Michael Thomas might repeat another monster fantasy football season, like he had last season. Another very interesting one, and I want to point out this one because people really aren't paying attention to these guys, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Now, when Phillip Rivers left, it seemed like everyone just forgot completely about the offensive weapons that the Chargers have. Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They are very talented players, and they have an easy schedule for next season. He says this slate is also third easiest for a number 1 receiver and 11th easiest against the slot. So these two, it's looking like they're going to be able to put up at least Keenan Allen's going to be a top receiver. I like that because I think a lot of people are going to be sleeping on the Chargers. They're going to let the Chargers receivers slip a little farther than they should, and you should definitely take advantage. Here's the one that scares me. Now, he lists these 4 receivers together: Chris Godwin, Anthony Miller of the Bears, Russell Gage for the Falcons, and Trent Taylor for the 49ers. He says, I listed these 4 receivers together as their teams are tied for the third easiest schedule for slot receivers this season. But really, what I want to talk about is Chris Godwin because, all of these other guys really aren't elite fantasy guys. Chris Godwin, elite fantasy guy, Tom Brady in the building. People are thinking he's going to, edge out Mike Evans for the targets and the fantasy football points. So if you're looking at this, then this is very, very interesting because he's going to put up points. He's going to get a ton of targets, and he has an easy schedule. So Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, Kenny Golladay should be surging up your draft boards. Now, another team he has here, which is actually in the top 3 easiest overall cornerback schedule, the Carolina Panthers. So that means instant boost for DJ Moore. Curtis Samuel and Robbie Anderson, they're going to be secondary guys, going to be flexes, wide receiver 2s, possibly. Not going to be, those top dogs, but they stand to, get a boost from this as well. DJ Moore, I think he's going to have a big season. He's going to be a guy people are sleeping on just because he's on the Panthers with Teddy Bridgewater, but he quietly had a pretty good season last season. 87 receptions, 1,100 yards, 4 TDs, guys. So, don't sleep on DJ Moore. I think he's very, very talented and on a team where, he is the top dog. Now, let's move on to the downgrades because, of course, with the upgrades, we got to talk the downgrades, and these are actually quite concerning. I won't touch too much on the Jets, Rashad Perriman and Denzel Mims, just because I know those aren't guys that people are necessarily huge on. Those are guys, you're going to take a chance on. They're not going to be your wide receiver 1 or anything like that. The Bills, Stephon Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley. Buffalo is projected to have the second hardest overall cornerback schedule. And remember, I've talked about this before. This is why I don't like Josh Allen. And certainly I don't like any of these guys for their playoff schedule.
So not only do they have a tough schedule overall, they have a very, very tough fantasy football playoff schedule. And these are going to be guys that, man, you got to get them, I guess if you must, if Stephon Diggs is, much better than the next guy down, the next wide receiver, then you get him. But it's also going to be tough because I know, I don't think this is just going to become the Stephon Diggs show in Buffalo. John Brown was a very, very capable wide receiver last season. So it's going to be interesting to see how they spread the ball around. I think he's going to be the number one, but I think it might be a 1A, 1B type situation. But we'll just have to see. Next is disappointing because it's a guy I'm pretty big on. DJ Chark Jr. and the rest of the Jaguars receivers. They have the third toughest overall cornerback schedule. This stinks because have we fully seen what Gardner Minshew can do? Was his first season a fluke? That causes more concern for me. I know it was Minshew mania last season and he was doing very well, but you get a year under your belt, teams have the film on you. It gets a bit tougher the more you play. DJ Chark was a stud last season. Did very well, considering these circumstances. So this concerns me here. Definitely going to be a downgrade to DJ Chark Jr. But this next one here concerns me much more. The Seahawks, DK Metcalf. So he says here, Seattle's overall cornerback schedule is fairly average, but there's no good news if you're a number one perimeter receiver. And according to his stats here, DK Metcalf runs on the perimeter 89% of the time. Tyler Lockett, however, is constantly in the slot 69% of the time, so he shouldn't be affected too much. But for guys who are big on DK Metcalf, he may struggle a bit. Honestly, though, I think DK Metcalf is such a freak of nature. He's so athletic, so gifted physically, that I think he's going to become a guy who sort of becomes matchup proof. I think, yes, he's still a bit raw, but I know the Seahawks want him to be that guy. They want him to be the dog. So I'm hoping even at least, he can get some big plays with that speed because he has to match up with Patrick Peterson, Jalen Ramsey. It says Tre'Davious White, Stephon Gilmore, Darius Slay, and James Bradbury. So it sucks. Oh, he also plays Miami and he plays San Francisco. That sucks. The regular season for him is going to suck, but there is a silver lining. During the fantasy football playoffs, Seattle is set for the fourth easiest slate overall and the second easiest for number one wide receivers against the Jets, Redskins, and Rams. So guys, if you can brave out the storm that is the regular season, DK Metcalf is going to pay off for you in the fantasy football playoffs. I think he's going to be huge. I really think he's going to take a big step forward next season. We saw him do a pretty darn good job as the Seahawks, number 2 wide receiver. Tyler Lockett, still a guy that I see as valuable, but I think DK Metcalf's time is coming. This next one here, I can't say I was too big on this guy, but I understand why people are. 49ers Deebo Samuel. He broke his foot and, he may miss some time to open up the regular season. So this may, downgrade him more. He's going to slip. So this might be a guy, you want to stash. He doesn't have an easy schedule. He's projected to face shadow coverage in a league high 10 games. Patrick Peterson, James Bradbury, Darius Slay, Jalen Ramsey, Stephon Gilmore. Oh my goodness, this is pretty bad. Jair Alexander, Tre'Davious White, and Marshawn Lattimore. So, he has a tough slate ahead of him, becoming the 49ers wide receiver 1 basically. The wide receiver core for that team is not too, established, with Emmanuel Sanders leaving. But Deebo Samuel is that guy. We saw him perform very, very well last season, and in the Super Bowl, he was giving the Chiefs work. But it looks like next season, fantasy football, it's going to be a bit tough for him. But I think this might be a guy you want to stash, with the injury concern. He's gonna show up injured on draft day. And whenever you see a guy, it says he's injured on draft day, people will not draft him. And suspended or, injured. People want guys who are there for them now. They don't like to plan for the long term, but plan for the long term. Another tip I can give you, plan for the long term because, I'm not going to lie, when Le'Veon Bell was suspended 4 games that season a few years ago, I didn't draft him because he was suspended and he came back to bite me in the butt and it certainly whooped me later on when I faced him. So, just because a guy's going to miss time early on in the season doesn't mean you shouldn't draft him, especially if he's only missing a couple games or even just a quarter of the season. So plan for the long term. If he's hurt during the start of the season, just pick up another wide receiver that can, make do for the first 2 weeks because, who knows how much he's going to miss. It actually says here he might miss a week or 6 to open 2020, so it's a big range. Hopefully he can be healthy by then and, deliver for some fantasy football. The rest of these guys here aren't guys who are, you're not going to be wasting too much, draft capital on. Randall Cobb, Hunter Renfrow. But one is very interesting, Tyler Boyd, because like I said, guys, I'm not too big on Tyler Boyd. I've expressed this before. I'm not as big as other people on the Bengals right now, and they're sitting at the 5th toughest cornerback slate overall. That proves to be a problem also for Joe Burrow. Hopefully AJ Green can play, but I'm concerned about this overall because, got a rookie quarterback. He's facing such a tough schedule, and I just don't know how that's going to end up. So, be cautious when drafting Bengals wide receivers, and especially, I know a lot of people are big on Tyler Boyd, but I honestly think he is going to be a bust. All right, guys, with that, we're going to go into our break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about some things that I was just wrong about. Darn you, Eagles. All right, enjoy the break, and we'll be right back after this.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. So, I don't know if you guys heard, man, there were some pretty big, colossal news out of Philadelphia this week. Yes, it has to do with the Philadelphia Eagles. Oh, no. They didn't trade for Jamal Adams. Oh, there was a signing. They signed Jason, not Jadavion. Jason Peters is back in Philly. And now don't get me wrong. Don't mistake my tone. I'm not, no disrespect to Jason Peters. He is a phenomenal left tackle. He was actually rated very, very highly in the top 10 of offensive linemen last season, according to PFF. Now, the only problem I have with Jason Peters, and I believe he was rated in the top 10 in tackles, excuse me. I don't want to, give a blanket statement and say out of all of them, all of the offensive linemen out there, he's top 10. Anyway, regardless, sorry. This was the big news coming out of Philly. You know what? I should have known better because of what the Eagles have been doing this offseason. They shocked us during the draft. They're shocking us now. That combined with the news that no fans will be allowed to attend games provided great big news out of Philly this week. My thoughts on the move. I understand why the Eagles did it. I assume that this is, of course, this is to bolster the offensive line, but clearly there's some doubt concerning the rookie. Andre Dillard. Well, the second-year player now, Andre Dillard, and they don't want to move forward with him as their, they do want to move forward as number one option, but they want insurance. They seemed, I thought that they were pretty confident in the kid, or at least wanted to move forward developing him. I know he's not the greatest left tackle ever at the moment, but getting rid, letting Jason Peters go felt like, they're moving forward, starting this, usher this new kid in. It's his time. They're also bringing Jason Peters back to play guard, which is a position he's never played ever. And so that is going to be very, very interesting considering, yes, he's a very dominant left tackle, great left tackle, but they are different positions, right? And he's also 38 years old, about to be 39. Never mind the fact that, there's already going to be limited training as is. And for him to, sort of slide into a new position, in these times and at this age, it's kind of concerning. But I know he's very talented. He's a smart guy. I'm sure he'll, I hope he'll pick it up. But I think the Eagles are relying too much on his pure talent alone to make him able to slide him into another position. But this does kind of not make sense, right? Because the Eagles were getting younger. And now the Eagles are getting much, much older. This is a guy who's about to be 39 years old, who says he wants to play into his 40s at offensive lineman. It's pretty insane. I really did not think that this would be the big news, guys. I don't know. I hoped that the Eagles were going to do something else. Maybe sign Jadeveon Clowney to a 1-year deal that wasn't too expensive, because they are projected to be over the cap by $50 million after next season. So it's a bit concerning, their cap situation. But, they added a 39-year-old for $6 million with $3 million guaranteed. So, hey, you spent $6 million. Why not spend, just maybe $10 million more on Jadeveon Clowney? Whatever, right? You're already throwing it out there. But it's good for them. It'll be good for their locker room. It's good for the fans. A lot of fans do love Jason Peters. He's been on the team for basically ever. And he's a talented player. I'm not saying they're not signing some scrub. Like I said, he was ranked very highly according to PFF last season. And, hopefully he can stay healthy. That's my main concern as well. If he gets injured again, the signing is going to look even sillier. It's not a silly signing. I shouldn't say that. It's a silly signing when you consider the circumstances and the buzzing that was going around, and me being tricked into thinking there was actually big news coming out of Philly this week. But the move makes sense. The other moves were, they were a little bit far-fetched. It was kind of wishful thinking to think that the Eagles would pick up Jadeveon or trade for Jamal Adams. The Jamal Adams trade was just one of those, could happen, probably won't, because it's kind of really far out there. But to give my thoughts down the second half of the news coming out of Philadelphia, no fans will be able to attend the games in the fall. Man, okay, so this clearly sucks, right? And I'm not an Eagles fan, I'm not one who, I'm not, dying to buy tickets to an Eagles game, right? But I can definitely understand how horrible that must feel as a fan to know that you can't go to watch your team live and in person. But this is necessary. If you are against this, or you want this to be changed, you want to be allowed to go to an NFL game, you're out of your mind. Now, the only way I could see, this happening is if, like the Patriots, I know they're applying for some permission to have reduced venue numbers, to have 20% of the total capacity allowed to go to the games. But I really don't want, if I have to be honest, I would take not being able to go to these games and not having fans in the stands for these games over having them able to go and this thing getting much, much worse. Because that's what's going to happen. There's no way that you can expect, tens of thousands of people to be packed into arenas. One, there's going to be no matter what. Here's my issue as well. No matter what happens, there's not going to be any social distancing, right? Well, there is going to be some forms, right? They can sell seats, only sell certain seats, and spread people out. But getting in and out of the venue is going to be very difficult, right? I mean, people get up to go to the bathroom, just walking by each other. You're going to be in close proximity to other people. Let alone, if it's at full capacity, you guys, if you've been to live sporting events or any live events, really concerts in general, you are just shoulder to shoulder with people at times, right? So it's very, very dangerous. Not to mention, it's already dangerous enough for the players, and to have even more people there, possibly transmitting it to a staff member who knows where the virus could spread or how it could spread. So it's tough, and it's tough to think about, but it's becoming something that's reality, something that we should be used to at this point. And I know it hits harder because with cities and states reopening, it feels like this is getting better, but in actuality, it's not. And so, we have to sort of keep that. We have to keep that in mind, and we have to remember that this is not a hoax, this is not a joke. This is something that is very, very important, and we still need to be all in it together. I get kind of discouraged at times because when the pandemic first started and everything was closing down, the world felt very together. But of course, as this thing has gone on and people have gotten restless and tired of sitting at home and, caught wind of a certain article that says something is a hoax or this, that, and the third, whatever have you, this pandemic has become a divisive thing. And some people have used it as an instrument to push political agenda, and really make it something that it's not. And, so like I said, with that comes, the people who want everything to reopen and do things that are very, very dangerous. Regarding the players, again, just to, touch on this, I think it was the NFLPA is going to propose an opt-out issue for this next season for the players, which I think is great. I think it's great. I think basically every major sport that is trying to reopen should be doing this or trying to get back in season. For sure. I did read recently that a WNBA player was denied her request for opt-out, which was absolutely terrible. I felt horrible reading that, and to know that the WNBA is basically telling this woman that she can't opt out of playing due to coronavirus. It's upsetting. But I don't know if it's surprising. It actually is surprising because the WNBA is usually very leads the pack, and so it was a bit disappointing. But for the NFL to do it, it is a good idea for the players. Now, is it a good idea for the season? I don't know. That's a much different story, right? But that's not the biggest concern, right? It's a tough. It's not black and white. It's very much gray. Because while I want the players to be very, very safe, but I think if they get an opt-out option, I think a lot of players really are going to opt out, and it's going to be a much different league. There's a lot of players who are very concerned about going to play football, and players who have expressed that they're not going to come back and play. They've said, think about it like this. Let me put it this way, guys. To us, we see megastars. We see freak athletes. We see uber talented men going on that field, giving it their all, competing their hardest, winning glory for the cities and states that they represent. But at the end of the day, guys, these guys are human. They're people just like you, just like me, just like everyone else on this planet. And so, their bank accounts might not look the same as ours, but they are human beings. And just as you do not want to go out, into a crowded restaurant, or you don't want to go around where people don't have masks, or you don't feel safe outside. Of course, it's not applying to everyone, but you get what I'm trying to say. They don't either. And at the end of the day, them going to play games, just as in the NBA, and they are having some issues with their bubble, that I won't speak on, but, they're risking their lives. And that's the simple fact of the matter. If you don't believe that this pandemic is serious or can kill you, you are sadly mistaken. so many people, honestly, a very upsetting amount of people have lost their lives to coronavirus, and an alarming amount in the United States. We have not done a good enough job with the pandemic, and that's just plain and simple. But we can't we can't push our own personal opinions on other people, right? You can have your own opinion, but you can't try and push that onto someone, especially concerning something like this, where it's literally a matter of life and death. If you feel otherwise, then I'm sorry for you, but that is the reality of the situation, right? This is a sickness that's killing people, and going to play football, I'm sorry, guys. I love football to death. I love the NFL. I love watching my team play and get glory and win Super Bowls. And every Sunday, it's amazing the feeling you get when you wake up and you hear the music, and it's great. And you're watching primetime games, and it's awesome, right? You hear that. That's just awesome, right? But it's not worth risking your life over. I have to be honest here. And if a player feels that he's risking his life, he shouldn't have to play, right? These players are already risking their health for the long term, for the rest of their lives, by slamming into each other. We've seen, players' lives change forever, and the issues with CTE and all that, and brain injuries and stuff like that. So it's already a risky game. This pandemic makes it a little bit riskier, and while it may ruin the season, and we might not have a season if too many players are opting out, it's a right that they deserve to have. So it is what it is, guys. What can you say? We are living in very, very strange times. And so we have to get used to these things. But, I guess to just wrap it up, man, Jason Peters signing really is not big. Sucks that was the news. The bigger news is no one's allowed to go to Eagles games, which is the smart move. I agree with that. Players should have the option. If they don't want to play, they don't have to. All right, guys, let's go into our last break of the day. And when we get back, we're going to start off talking about my man, Patrick Mahomes. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after this short break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Guys, welcome back. We are in the last segment of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, I want to start this segment off talking about my boy, my guy, the best quarterback in football, Patrick Mahomes. And now, the reason I want to talk about him, yes, he got that massive contract, the historic extension. He's going to be a Chief for life. But I want to talk about the ESPN Live draft trends and how Patrick Mahomes has been trending. Since getting that deal, he has moved up enormously to pick 13 overall. This is quite concerning. Right behind him, Lamar Jackson has also moved a bit forward and is picked 14th overall. They've kind of hovered in the teens, but I think 13th overall is the highest we've seen one of these quarterbacks. That's pretty insane. Regarding my tip earlier, I said Oh no, I actually didn't give you guys this tip. But if I were to give you another tip, guys, don't spend too much on a quarterback. The reason being, I understand the hype behind Patrick Mahomes, behind Lamar Jackson. I honestly get it. But missing out, the combination of getting, someone who's available here, like Travis Kelce, like Nick Chubb, like Austin Eckler, who we've seen be elite, who was one of the top running backs last season. The combination of getting that kind of player and waiting to get a guy like Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, these are top 5 kind of guys. That is going to serve you better than picking up Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson this early, missing out on an elite skill position player, and, settling for someone who is in a much lower tier, right? Because if we look at this, right, say this is a 10-man league. How these drafts are going, it's Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Ezekiel Elliott, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara 5, Dalvin Cook 6, Derrick Henry, DeAndre Hopkins 8, Devontae Adams 9, Julio Jones 10. Tyreek Hill is 11th, Aaron Jones is 12th, Patrick Mahomes comes in at 13, Lamar Jackson comes in at 14. Now let's just take a look at the guys who come right after. One of them is Chris Godwin. I don't know if you know him. He was just the number 2 fantasy football wide receiver last season. Right after that, Travis Kelce, just the number 1 fantasy football tight end last season by a pretty big margin. After that is Kenyon Drake. Feel how you want about him. He did very well when he started for the Cardinals. After that, this is this guy named Nick Chubb, still available, top 10 fantasy football running back, who is being selected as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th, 8th, 9th running back. That late, these are guys who are going to put up huge numbers. And I think, when you look at Patrick Mahomes, of course, last season, it was hampered by the injury. He was a top 10 quarterback still. And Lamar Jackson, I think the only one, I guess I could give you some wiggle room with Lamar Jackson. If you wanted to argue with me why you should be taking him that early, fine. Because he's basically a running back and a quarterback wrapped into one, right? The way he plays, and for fantasy football, how well that does for you, he's going to score a ton of points. But for Patrick Mahomes, a more pure passer, a guy, he can score he's going to score a ton of fantasy football points, right? But I think he can wait. And I understand why people are doing this, but I just feel like that is incredibly early. That is way too early for these guys. These are guys that, if I was to draft Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, it'd be in the 3rd round, because of the level of talent that the guys are right here at the start of the 2nd round. There's just way too many good picks here to pass up on and to make worse for my team than to have Pat Mahomes. So look, let's look at this here. So pick 10. Let's look here. So pick 10. 1, 2, 3. That means he has pick 7, right? This person would end up with Derrick Henry and Patrick Mahomes. Yes, that sounds amazing, right? To have those two. But would you rather have Derrick Henry, Chris Godwin, and Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson? Would you rather have Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, and Russell Wilson? These are decisions that you're going to have to make, and you're going to have to be thinking about, because getting a quarterback this early is insane, and he is trending upward because of the contract, which is very, very interesting to me. That has nothing to do with fantasy football or how he's going to play. He's going to light it up no matter what, but it's interesting to see that since he's been trending in the media, he just got the cover of GQ recently. I don't know. People just want him on their fantasy football teams, I guess. Not gonna lie, my team's name last year was Take Mahomes, Country Roads, or Country Roads, Take Mahomes. One of those two. It was Country Roads, Take Mahomes. Yes, I had the Patrick Mahomes pun there. Didn't even have him on my team, but he's big, not only in regular football but in fantasy football, of course. He's surging up the board, so you're gonna want to take advantage of that. Somebody's gonna leave a great talent on the board to pick up either of these guys. So 2 picks that you wouldn't be able to access as a middle round pick in the second round, you're going to be able to access right now because people are just buying way high on these quarterbacks. You can win your league without Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. It's possible, guys. You could draft Lamar Jackson and not be able to get one of these elite, more elite skill position players and suffer because of it. So, just wait on the quarterbacks, guys. I promise you, you will be okay. All right. Now, what I want to move on to talk about, I don't know how the Chiefs are doing it. Yes, this whole segment's going to be about the Chiefs. Why not, right? The Chiefs have signed Chris Jones to an extension of 4 years. It is insane. I was going to come on here and talk to you guys about how I thought Chris Jones was out in Kansas City and that you're going to need to downgrade the Kansas City Chiefs defense. Not that you were upgrading it anyway, but, without Chris Jones, I think, the Kansas City Chiefs defense really doesn't become fantasy football relevant. His pressures and his sack totals really help the defense, score, in fantasy football. When Patrick Mahomes signed that contract, I was like, he's for sure a goner. But they came to an agreement on 4 years, $85 million, $60 million total guaranteed upon signing. He deserves this for sure. He was absolutely huge in the Super Bowl. I am just so happy to have him still on the team. I'm not gonna lie, guys. For a second there, I was kind of sad when he was saying, I want $20 million a year. I'm not playing. I was like, how are we gonna afford this guy? They found a way to do it, and he's gonna be with us for the next 4 seasons. I love it. He's an absolute stud. He's honestly second best defensive tackle behind Aaron Jones. You can argue. Aaron Donald. Aaron Jones, the running back. Aaron Donald. And I'm really glad they got this done. Kansas City Chiefs defense is going to surprise you guys next season. Mark my words. They were I think 11th in overall last season in ESPN leagues. So that means they were a defense 1. I'm going to coin that term. I said it last episode as well. They were a defense 1 in 12-man leagues. So they should have been rostered. But I know in a ton of leagues they weren't rostered because of the history they have. It's really interesting because, of course, I gave you guys that tip to wait on your defenses, but it's interesting how people treat the defenses, right? Because, the defenses that get drafted early are, ones who are, historically great or constantly have a good defense. You see the Baltimore Ravens always getting drafted early, the Steelers, the Rams, the Bears. But man, you can have one bad defensive year. You are not getting picked up, man. I mean, look at the 49ers. Like I said, they were drafted in less than 5% of leagues and became one of the top fantasy football defenses. So I expect my Chiefs to do a 180 like that, especially reading Chris Jones saying, I love you at Chiefs. I promise to bring you more championship rings and a defensive player of the year. You got to love it. I love the drive. I love the attitude. And hoping he can do it for sure because he is an absolute stud, man. I really, really enjoy him being on the team and his attitude. What he did in the Super Bowl was phenomenal. He didn't have to get a bunch of pressures. Swatting those passes was huge for momentum, huge for the rest of the game. And it looks like, guys, the Chiefs are building a dynasty. I think this is, the closest thing we can see right now to a team building a dynasty in the NFL. Who knows how this ends up, of course, later down the line. Of course, us, I'm not a contract expert, so I can't tell you how this money is all going to line up and when, and how, I know they tried to structure the Mahomes deal pretty, intelligently where, it's spread out over, a larger period of time and, he has certain guarantees in certain years and there's the mechanisms based on his performances and stuff like that. So I know that they're trying to make it as team friendly as possible. But I'm hoping, we can keep these guys together for quite some time through some, wizardry of contract work. There was a point where the Cowboys were doing something like this, and everybody was saying the same thing. So if they can do it, then we can definitely do it as well. So, to just refer back to my power rankings, I gave you guys my power rankings a while ago. The Chiefs are still on top, baby. Especially, signing Mahomes that huge deal, giving him all that comfort, security. He's on the team for a long time. and to add Chris Jones, and so he has that security, I think it's going to be great. So keep your eyes on the Chiefs next season, guys. They're going to light it up as usual, and I think they'll be able to turn around on the defensive side of the ball. Now, before we get into, the outro of the show and wrap it up, I want to talk about Odell because he recently revealed his color of his hair. Not a big announcement. Sounds silly to say, but he basically announced, he's out for blood. He's out for blood, and next season he ain't being humble. He's going back. Basically, what I took from this, he's going back to his diva ways, and I'm not saying he's going to be a diva, right? When I say that, I mean he's going back to regular Odell, and I like it. I like it. I talked about Odell recently, and I did say he's a guy who craves the attention, and he does. He's showing us now. Revealing the color of your hair as a mindset change is sort of interesting, but it's one that it's an interesting way to do it, but it fetches attention, right? He likes the attention, but the way he was talking and what he was saying, basically saying bleep being humble. When you're humble, they take it as a weakness. But when you're loudmouth, they don't like it. But he's like, screw all that. I'm being who I am. This is how I feel. That was one of the quotes. This is how I feel. And, I like it. I like it. So if you are lower on Odell Beckham Jr., give him a little bit of boost because I really think, he can bounce back next season. Of course, I'm not drafting him in the first round or anything like that, but he's a guy, like I've told you guys, certainly going to be certainly going to be a guy that you should be keeping your eye on, after the first 2 rounds, because I don't think he'll go in the first or second round, but he's a guy, you can take a chance on. I really think he's going to outperform his ADP. He is so talented, so gifted. If he can just, stay focused and keep that mentality of, I want to go kill it. You know what I mean? I want to go out there. I want to get these yards, these touchdowns. I want to help people win their fantasy football championships. Because right now he's going in, I think it's the end of the 4th round. That is immense value for a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., who before was clearly a first round kind of pick. I think he's going to be huge for a lot of fantasy football owners that get him that late. And, for the Browns, because if he's able to, return to proper form, they're going to be able to compete, at least with the Steelers and Ravens. I don't know if they're going to go win the division, but he's going to help Baker Mayfield get better. He's a beast when fully healthy and at, full capacity. And that team right now on paper, man, just like last season, they look great. So if they can get it all together, they will be a force to be reckoned with. So reports are, Baker Mayfield's healthy, Jarvis is healthy, Odell's healthy. So we'll get to see the full 100% Browns. And that's what I think I mentioned that last episode. Last season was sort of like dipping your foot in the water. Now we're getting a real deep dive. So I think this is the season to bet on the Browns. This is the one that you're going to want to be watching and paying attention to. If they fold, they're just terrible. They're cursed. If the Browns don't do well next season, they are cursed. And that's it. But I really think that next season is the year that they turn it around. We might see them as a wild card team. So don't be surprised if we do. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I want to ask that you follow us on all social media, guys. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at GSMC_F football. Leave a comment, leave a 5-star rating. Let us know what you love. Let us know what you hate. Of course, keep it respectful and constructive, and that helps make us better for you guys. So with that, guys, I'm going to close it out. I hope you guys are staying safe, happy, and healthy. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you here next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.